For most of the last century, the path forward was simple enough that almost everyone understood it. You finish high school, you go to college, you earn a degree, and somewhere on the other side of that process, a better life is waiting for you. This wasn't just advice people gave, it was a belief so widely accepted that questioning it felt almost strange, like questioning whether reading was a good idea or whether saving money made sense. And for a long time, the belief was backed up by real evidence. College graduates earned significantly more than people who didn't go. The gap between a degree holder and someone without one was wide enough and visible enough that the math seemed obvious. You invest 4 years and some money up front, and the return pays off over a lifetime. But here is something that almost nobody mentions when they repeat that advice today. The version of college that produced those outcomes existed in a very different world from the one young people are stepping into right now. To understand what changed, you have to think about what a college degree was actually doing for people in the decades when it felt like a reliable path. Going to college back then was still relatively uncommon. Only a fraction of the population had degrees, which meant that having one immediately set you apart in a job market where most people didn't. Employers used the degree as a signal, a quick way of identifying candidates who had demonstrated some level of discipline and ability, and because the supply of graduates was limited, the credential held real value. Then something changed. Governments, universities, and families all pushed the same message for decades: everyone should go to college, and so more and more people did. The number of graduates rose steadily every year, and the degree that once set you apart slowly became the thing that almost everyone had. When a credential becomes universal, it stops doing the one job it was designed to do. Because if nearly everyone applying for a position has a degree, it no longer separates anyone from the crowd. So instead of degrees making people more competitive, they became the minimum requirement just to stay in the game. Employers started requiring advanced degrees for positions that once went to bachelor's holders and bachelor's degrees for jobs that once needed no degree at all. The credential kept inflating, but the value underneath it didn't grow at the same rate. And all of that might have still been manageable if the cost of getting the degree had stayed reasonable. But that didn't happen either. Over the last few decades, the price of a university education rose dramatically, far faster than inflation, far faster than wages, and far faster than the actual financial return a degree could realistically be expected to produce. Students began graduating with amounts of debt that would have seemed almost unimaginable to the generations who were telling them college was the right move. So imagine you're 18 years old, and someone is telling you to borrow the equivalent of several years' salary in order to earn a credential that will make you competitive for entry-level positions that pay just enough to cover your basic expenses, with maybe a little left over each month to slowly chip away at the debt you took on to get there. When you lay it out like that, the calculation starts to feel very different from the one previous generations were offered. And here's where it gets more interesting. Around the same time that the degree was losing its edge, a growing number of companies started quietly questioning whether the degree requirement they had written into their job listings was actually helping them find better employees. And when some of them looked closely at the data, the answer was often surprising. No, some of the most productive people in their organizations didn't have traditional 4-year degrees. Some of the most capable engineers, designers, and analysts had built their skills through entirely different paths: online courses, independent projects, years of hands-on experience in the work itself. And because the tools for learning outside of universities had become dramatically more accessible, those paths were producing real results. So major companies started removing degree requirements from entire categories of jobs, not as a symbolic gesture, but because they genuinely found that the degree wasn't the most useful filter for what they actually needed. This doesn't mean that learning stopped mattering, What it means is that what was being sold was never really education in the deepest sense. It was a certificate that signaled education. And for decades, that certificate and the actual thing it was supposed to represent were close enough together that the difference didn't matter much. But as the cost of the certificate rose, and the supply of certificate holders grew, and the certificate itself became disconnected from any guarantee of skills or real outcomes, the gap between the signal and the substance became very hard to ignore. Young people today can feel that gap in a way that earlier generations couldn't, because they're the ones being asked to carry the most financial risk for a return that is no longer as clear or as predictable as it once was. And that's not a failure of imagination or ambition on their part. It's a reasonable response to a system that hasn't updated its promises to match the reality it's actually delivering. So the question isn't really whether education matters. The question is whether the specific product the higher education system has been selling for the last 50 years is still the most honest and effective way to give people the knowledge and opportunity they're genuinely looking for. Because the world is very good at selling systems long after those systems have stopped serving the people they were built for. And maybe the more important conversation isn't about whether young people should go to college. Maybe it's about what we actually want education to do for people in a world where the old answers are becoming harder and harder to defend.